In today's video, we pay tribute to the life and career of Jon Huber, a loving family man who will forever go down as one of the greatest wrestling big men of his generation. By all accounts, Jon was loved by everyone he knew and has left behind memories that will last forever in the hearts of fans from all across the globe. So join us today as we pay our respects by taking a deep dive into his entire career journey in, you know what that means, the Brodie Lee story. Jonathan Huber was born into the world on December 16, 1979 in Rochester, New York. It was there that he grew up watching football and hockey. He even played a little hockey himself in the independent youth leagues around his area, as well as becoming an accomplished lacrosse player in high school. Despite his love for this, though, it was pro wrestling that was always his #1 passion. He and his brother grew up watching WWE and WCW together, with Jon listing his favorite performers as Rick Rude, Jake the Snake Roberts, and The Big Show. Given his natural physical attributes, it was only a matter of time then before the youngster decided to try out wrestling for himself, and this is exactly what he did in 2003, starting out in backyard promotions under the ring name Huber Boy No. 2. It didn't take long after this for him to realize that he wanted to take wrestling more seriously as a career path, and so he sought out training from Kirby Marcos, Rick Matrix, and former ECW star Tony Mama Luke, all of whom would show him the ropes. Soon after that, he was booked for a few matches with both Rock City Wrestling and Rochester Pro Wrestling, and this was where he developed the ring name The Right Stuff Brodie Lee. Now, given Huber's similarities to wrestling legend Bruiser Brodie, many assume that his new gimmick was a tribute to the man himself, but that's actually false. While he was a big fan of Brodie's, it actually came from the Kevin Smith movie Mallrats, and was a combination of actor Jason Lee and the character he portrays in that flick, Brodie Bruce's names. As for The Right Stuff, well, that was just a nod to the lighthearted b-boy style gimmick he was working at the time. Yes, Lee would come to the ring dressed in colorful attire, accompanied by New Kids on the Block's hit song The Right Stuff, always ready to start the party at a moment's notice. It was a popular gimmick, and he found success with it in Rochester Pro Wrestling over the next 4 years, winning multiple titles, including the promotion's heavyweight championship on 3 separate occasions, as well as their tag team, television, and kayfabe dojo championships. The next step in his career after this came when he made his debut with Philadelphia promotion Chikara on March 24, 2007 at their Time Will Prove Everything show, something which, as it turns out, only happened by chance when local wrestler Reckless Youth no-showed the event, leaving a spot open on the card for Brodie to fill. His subsequent performance that night was enough to impress the company, and he would return a couple of months later, beginning a 5-year-long run. Of course, Chikara wasn't the only promotion the big man worked with during this time. He also appeared for Squared Circle Wrestling back in New York, where he initially got over huge as a heel after kayfabe punching out a fan in a parking lot. On top of this, he spent some time in Ring of Honor, both Dragon Gate and Dragon Gate USA, Jersey All Pro Wrestling, and Evolve, the latter of which being where he would have his first meeting with Jon Moxley years before their AEW title showdown. It was also at this time that Brodie married fellow professional wrestler Amanda Huber. The newlywed enjoyed married life while also continuing to build a name for himself on the independent circuit. He spent a year in Chikara doing 2007, going on a monster streak where no one was able to pin or submit him, and at the same time, he also adopted a more serious character as he began aligning himself with Colin and Jimmy Olsen, taking on the nickname of Big Rig and acting as a heavy for the group. This new character saw him start a storyline where he would eventually bully smaller wrestlers on the roster. This was something which eventually caught the attention of Claudio Castagnoli, or Cesaro to WWE fans, who took umbrage with his actions and challenged him to a series of matches between April and July of 2008. The first 2 of these ended in disqualifications after both men knocked out referees, and while Big Rig was able to get a victory in the third, it was the 4th blow-off match between the 2 that is most memorable. In the company's first ever steel cage match, they went to war in what was considered to be an unusually brutal contest for the more traditionally family-friendly promotion at the time, albeit one that got over huge with the live audience. Following this, Brodie formed a stable with Eddie Kingston and Grizzly Redwood called the Roughnecks, and with these 2 men by his side, he continued his rampage through Philadelphia. Meanwhile, back in his other home base of 2CW, he had been forced to turn babyface as fans were continually cheering for him despite his villainous actions. It was here that he began a friendly rivalry with Slick Wagner Brown in April 2009 that saw both men trade wins before Lee eventually got the best of his opponent in a 2 out of 3 falls rubber match on February 19, 2010. After this victory, he challenged for the 2CW Heavyweight Championship on June 20th, but would lose as a result of outside interference. Not to be stopped, however, he managed to earn himself another shot at the gold, and on August 22, 2010, the big man was able to defeat Jason Axe to finally win the company's top belt. And while he was defending this belt in New York, he was still making waves back in Philly, where he had begun a feud with his former tag team partner Grizzly Redwood. This feud lasted until November of 2010, in fact, at which point the two reunited to continue their path of destruction, carrying on as a unit throughout 2011 and 2012 until Brodie announced that he had signed a developmental contract with WWE and would be leaving the Indies altogether. Yes, 2012 was a big year for Jon Huber. His years of hard work had finally paid off, and he was finally being picked up by the biggest promotion in the world. But it almost didn't happen at all, as it turns out. He was actually on the verge of retiring from the industry altogether when WWE Head of Talent Relations John Laurinaitis called him up out of the blue to offer him a tryout. Unfortunately, though, the call got broken up midway through, and John began to panic as he realized he didn't have a number to reach Laurinaitis on. Luckily, his friend Cesaro was already in WWE by that point, and he was able to reconnect the two, letting history take its course. But even that wasn't the biggest thing that happened to Huber this year. On top of all this, his first son Brodie would be born, giving the new father the extra incentive to go out there and work hard so he could provide for his family. And so it was that on May 18th of that year, Jon Huber made his debut for FCW in a house show match, now wrestling under the new name of Luke Harper. When FCW was rebranded and folded into NXT 3 months later, Harper went with them, and by November had begun appearing as a follower of Bray Wyatt. The Wyatt family, of course, was the latest stable from the company, led by Bayou cult leader Bray, and with his rugged wildman look, it only made sense to put Harper in the group. He would soon be joined by Eric Rowan, too, who would become his regular tag team partner from then on in. Their first match together came on the January 9th, 2013 edition of NXT, and saw them make a statement by trampling through Percy Watson and Yoshitatsu. Following this, their warpath continued when they beat the duo again a couple of weeks later, and then followed that up with a win over Bo Dallas and Michael McGillicuddy. A few months later, and the big man got his first taste of gold in the company when he and Rowan became NXT Tag Team Champions. It was clear by then that the black and gold brand wasn't going to be able to contain them for long, and that they would soon explode over onto the main roster. The fuse for this explosion was lit on the May 27, 2013 episode of Raw, when the first of several vignettes introducing fans to the Wyatt family aired. On these, the incoming stable continued their NXT gimmick by being presented as a backwoods hillbilly family who were intent on making their presence felt on the main roster. And they certainly did that. On the July 8th episode of Raw, the Wyatt family debuted by taking out Kane, and from there started a feud with the Big Red Machine, which would lead to a Ring of Fire match at that year's SummerSlam. Before that, though, Harper would get his main roster in-ring debut when he teamed with Rowan to defeat Tons of Funk on the July 26th episode of SmackDown, and after this, the two went on a winning streak for the next few months. By November, the whole family moved a rung up the ladder again when they began a program with Daniel Bryan, which would see the American Dragon temporarily join and then turn on them, all on the way to his WWE title victory at WrestleMania 30 in March 2014. Harper and Rowan had a spot at that year's WrestleMania 2, of course, helping their leader in his battle with John Cena. But before that, the big man got to take part in a much-anticipated six-man tag against The Shield at the February 23rd Elimination Chamber pay-per-view, one of the best matches of the company's modern era, and one that left the crowd electrified before it even began. After this, the two Wyatt underlings continued to team together for a while, feuding with the Usos over the WWE Tag Team Championships. By that point, though, pretty much everyone had realized the potential that lay within Harper, and were calling for him to get a big singles run where he could really show what he had to offer. Thankfully, it seemed like Vince McMahon heard this, as beginning on September 29, 2014, new vignettes aired on WWE programming explaining that Harper and Rowan had been set free by their master, and would now be transitioning into singles competition. This was a rather underwhelming way of ending the Wyatt family at the time, of course, but the important thing was that now Luke was going to get a chance to shine. He quickly proved his value when he defeated Dolph Ziggler to become the Intercontinental Champion on the November 17th episode of Raw, then further solidified this by joining Team Authority at that year's Survivor Series. Yes, it now felt like WWE were going to go all in on the big man and give him the Bruiser Brodie-like push that many had expected for him when he first arrived. Unfortunately, though, any momentum he started to build was halted when he lost the Intercontinental title back to Dolph Ziggler at December's Tables, Ladders, and Chairs pay-per-view, ending his reign at just 27 days. This confused a lot of people both in the audience and backstage who felt that there was so much more that could be done with Harper as a dominant champion. Unfortunately, it looks like he fell victim to one of Vince McMahon's many quirks when the boss decided he couldn't push the Rochester native as a monster due to his inability to do a southern accent correctly, something that Brodie would later discuss on the Talk is Jericho podcast. While he did remain in the Intercontinental title scene, being involved in both the excellent 7-man WrestleMania 31 ladder match and a fantastic Chicago street fight with Dean Ambrose a month later at Extreme Rules, it really felt like WWE had missed the moment with the big man, and he knew it. In early May of 2015, he was reunited with Eric Rowan in what many saw as a step back. And by July, the two were once again teaming with Bray Wyatt as well, in a full-scale Wyatt family reunion that now included a fourth member in Braun Strowman. And it was with the introduction of Strowman that Harper's problems continued to grow. Now, no longer the biggest and baddest of the group, he sank further into irrelevance as he and Rowan went from tag feud to tag feud without ever having any upward movement. Sure, there were some good matches in there. The Wyatt family versus the Brothers of Destruction match at the November 22nd Survivor Series was fun, as was the 8-man table match that saw the entire stable take on ECW alumni Tommy Dreamer, Rhino, and the Dudley Boys at the following month's TLC. But overall, it felt like he was stuck in a holding pattern and that his obvious talents were being wasted. In March of 2016, he suffered a knee injury that took him out of action for the next 6 months. And while it was tough being off the road for all this time, it did give Luke a chance to reevaluate where he stood in the company and what he could do to better his position when he got back. Upon returning in October, he had hoped that WWE would listen to some of his ideas and give him another shot in the singles division where he could really grow. Instead, however, they chose to place him back in the position of lackey to Bray Wyatt. He did manage to become a SmackDown Tag Team Champion at this time, and there was even a tease of the great things he could do when he turned face and briefly feuded with temporary Wyatt family member Randy Orton, but things never went any further than that. At WrestleMania 33, while his former stablemates Bray Wyatt and Orton were fighting over the WWE title, Luke Harper was relegated to the pre-show as part of the Andre the Giant Memorial Battle Royal. For the next few months after this, he did almost nothing of note. It wasn't until he reunited with Eric Rowan, who had just returned from injury, on the October 10, 2017 episode of SmackDown, that he regained any sense of relevancy. Thankfully, things were going better in his personal life, as Jon and his wife Amanda celebrated the birth of their second child, Nolan, that year. This must have been a special moment for the notorious family man, and now the proud father of 2 children, he once again committed himself to breaking through the glass ceiling in WWE. And to be fair, Harper and Rowan, now being repackaged as the Bludgeon Brothers, were allegedly set for a big push within the tag division at the time. They even managed to win the SmackDown Tag Team Championships at WrestleMania 34, and it's been said that the company were hoping to create a modern-day Road Warriors with them, but none of it came to pass in the end because Rowan was taken out by injury, and realizing that his push would now likely be scrapped as a result, Harper took the opportunity to take some time off himself and get surgery for a nagging wrist problem. By March 9, 2019, he was ready to hit the ring again, and he had hoped to get a program going into WrestleMania. Instead, however, he was left off the main card entirely, only managing to get a match against Dominik Dijakovic at WrestleMania Access, and then a brief spot in the Andre the Giant Memorial Battle Royal once more. While this was a blow, Harper took it as a personal challenge, and in a heartfelt social media post, he referred to his Access match as his WrestleMania moment, and just another opportunity to prove to higher-ups that he deserved more. Unfortunately, the company weren't listening, and now, realizing that he wasn't being used to his full potential, he had a decision to make. Stay with the WWE, or take a risk and try to make a name for himself elsewhere. Luckily for him, there was another game in town now as AEW had just formed, and knowing this, Harper decided to bet on himself when he publicly requested his release from the company on April 16, 2019. Unfortunately, he would not be granted this release as WWE added a further 6 months to his contract to account for the time taken off for injuries. Nevertheless, by December of that year, he would finally be free and able to pursue opportunities elsewhere. While most expected him to show up in AEW, there was also some talk of him having a potentially great run in New Japan Pro Wrestling. However, in the end, Huber chose the former, but would not be introduced in the way that people had initially expected. AEW's Dark Order stable were, to put it nicely, failing miserably at the time. It had become one of the most hated gimmicks in the industry, and many felt that whoever was soon going to be announced as the Exalted One of the group was inheriting a poison chalice. Many actually believed it would be Matt Hardy, as he seemed like the most likely person to make anything out of it, but in a surprise, it turned out to be Jon, who was now once again going by the name Brodie Lee, as was revealed on the March 18, 2020 episode of Dynamite. This was supposed to be a huge moment that would take place in Brodie's hometown of Rochester, but unfortunately, it was also the first week of the global shutdown, and so everything happened in front of an empty arena instead. It didn't matter in the end, though. He used his new creative freedom to prove that Vince McMahon had been wrong about him the whole time, and that he had it in him to be a star. He quickly turned the fortunes of the Dark Order around through a combination of his menacing, megalomaniacal on-screen character and his often hilarious segments with the rest of the group on being the Elite. It even got to the point where the once despised faction became arguably the best thing about AEW as a whole. By the time of the company's next pay-per-view show, Double or Nothing, Brodie found himself in a main event spot challenging his old friend Jon Moxley for the AEW World Heavyweight title in what was undoubtedly one of the matches of the night. He followed this up by annihilating Cody Rhodes in less than 4 minutes to become the TNT champion in an absolute star-making performance just a couple of months later. Yes, finally, Brodie Lee was reaching his potential, and his rematch with Cody a few weeks later was one of the best of the year, with the two going to war in a bloody and violent dog collar match. This would turn out to be Brodie Lee's final match. It had been initially reported that he was taking a few weeks off to recover from an injury, and when the subject was raised during a press call, AEW's owner Tony Khan stated that Brodie was taking some time out to heal up. Then, on December 26, 2020, the wrestling world was shocked to find out that Jon Huber had passed away when his wife left an emotional post on Instagram letting everyone know what had happened. Ever since this moment, the wrestling world has given an outpouring of love and celebrated the life and career of the late great big man. AEW would go on to dedicate the December 30th episode of Dynamite to Huber in one of the most emotional nights in wrestling history. If one thing has become clear recently, it's just how devoted Huber was to his family, with anyone who knew him stressing how much of a great husband and father he was. We've talked a lot about Brodie Lee and Luke Harper in this video, as that's how us fans knew him. However, as much as we all love the performances he put on in front of the camera, we appreciate and respect the person Jon Huber was more than anything. Because from what we've heard from his peers over the past week, he was truly a great man. Rest in peace, Jon Huber.